Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the globe. We hope you are all doing great. It's a beautiful day today, and we are so glad that you are here today for our webinar, Is Your Shared Services Center, or GIC, Driving the Digital Agenda? We wanted to point out today that we feel that the shared service or global in-house centers have become an increasingly important part of many enterprises, and the purpose for today is to help delineate the roles that are playing with the broader digital initiatives. We're also going to try to define what some of the outcomes and capabilities that are required to get to be a pinnacle enterprise. So with that, why don't I introduce our panelists for today? We are lucky to have three Everest Group analysts, and why don't I introduce, first we have Michael Jansen. Michael is the Chief Research Guru at Everest Group, and as a co-founder of our research practice, Michael offers profound insights and analysis to enterprises and service providers alike. He leverages his extensive experience identifying and understanding emerging trends to help organizations maximize their global service efforts. He's particularly well known for his ability to hypothesize clever and challenging ideas based on his fact-based insights across business and IT processes, sourcing models, and industries. Next, we have Rohitashwa Agarwal. Rohit is a practice director in our global sourcing practice. In this role, he focuses on engagements and initiatives with global in-house centers and shared service centers as the like. He also manages Everest Group's research membership focused on global in-house centers called Catalyst, which is the industry's only research program focusing exclusively on GICs and internal service delivery models. Finally, we have Parul Jain. Parul is a senior analyst in our global sourcing practice, and as part of her role, she actively tracks the digital services space in shared services and GIC industry. Her recent pursuits include the GIC Digital Maturity Pinnacle study, and in addition, she also manages Everest Group's offering focused on locations optimization. So as you can see, we have three analysts today that are ready to share their knowledge with everything regarding GICs and shared service centers. So why don't we talk about what we're going to cover today? And we've broken it into really three parts. First, is your shared services center or GIC driving the digital agenda? We want to talk about what that really means to your organization and what you need to be thinking about from an enterprise standpoint. Second, we're going to talk about how enterprises are executing digital in their GICs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to it. And then finally, we will have a Q&A session at the end. As Colin mentioned, feel free to type in your questions in the question box. We will try to get to all of them. We have a large number of people on today's webinar, so we ask for your patience as we do that. Now, before we go into the content slide, I just want to point out a question that tends to be on everyone's mind, and the answer is yes. Everyone will receive a copy of all of today's slides. Just by signing up within about 48 hours, you should receive a link with all the slides to today's webinar. I'll mention that again at the end. But with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Rohit and ask him to start level set us, Rohit, on what are the types of GIC models that we're talking about going forward.
Thanks a lot, Anil. Good morning, good evening, everyone. As we deep dive into the digital agenda that currently enterprises are driving through the GICs, let's first talk about what are the most prominent GIC or shared services models that we are seeing in the market. How exactly are global enterprises using these shared services or GIC setups? The most common and the historical model has been one of the low-cost aggregator. This is where most of the lift and shift happens. The GIC's primary role is to drive low-cost delivery for large portions of business and IT processes. However, in the last decade, a variety of nearshore and offshore locations have really matured in their GIC model, and a lot of global enterprises are actually using these GICs very strategically. What they have evolved into are global COEs, for particular processes. These are a variety of IT and business process services, including a lot of digital services. These global COEs are responsible, and then they are the go-to centers, they are the go-to teams for a lot of these digital processes, IT processes, and they're responsible for driving these processes across the enterprise, not just other GICs. They are responsible for driving innovation, efficiency improvement, etc., across these processes. Over the last few years, what we have also seen is that global enterprises are using GICs for driving their innovation agenda as well. And some of the best-in-class organizations have truly developed these GICs as innovation hubs. They are responsible for ongoing low-cost innovation, developing new products, and are also now becoming as the go-to teams for working on new market entry, working on new products and services developments. With that context, let me give it back to Alan to help us progress.
So thanks, Rohit. I think what we want to do now is have a quick poll to understand what everyone, where everyone rates themselves in terms of the GICs. So what we're asked, based on what Rohit just shared with us, self-rate yourself. Rate your GIC's current digital capability and so select the one that applies best. Would you say you're a low-cost aggregator? Somewhere in between low-cost aggregator and global center of excellence? You are a global center of excellence, potentially an innovation hub, or both a global center of excellence and an innovation hub. So you get the gold star for that one. So if everyone could vote, this helps us get an idea and put us in context for the rest of the webinar. I'll keep the poll open for another 3 seconds, and 2, and 1. And why don't we close the poll and let's see the results. So the results are pretty interesting here. We have 60% put us somewhere in between low cost and global COE, but 15% will rate their global COE as a global COE and an innovation hub. So that's pretty interesting. So Rohit, is that what you're seeing in terms of our research?
Interestingly, yes, Alan, that's actually completely in alignment with how we have seen the broader market evolve. What we have seen is, in the set of the GICs who have truly evolved as global COEs, taking a leap forward and trying to get to that last category of being both a global CO and innovation hub. So yeah, I think I expect a lot of interaction later today with the audience, because I believe people will align with the digital initiatives we want to talk about.
Excellent. So talk to us a little bit about these digital initiatives, Rohit.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So broadly, enterprises have been using these GICs for a variety of digital initiatives, and interestingly, they have followed different approaches. Traditionally, as they evolved from low-cost aggregators to global COEs, this was more of a push-based approach where a lot of global stakeholders, enterprises were expressing their requirements to the GICs, and there was a passive implementation of these initiatives top-down. However, some of the really best-in-class and mature GICs started taking more proactive initiatives in these areas. They have been actively implementing digital to improve the results and the impact they deliver for the parent. This has helped them not only in the core digital areas, but also improve their performance in the traditional business process and IT services space. This is a rare breed, some best-in-class GICs have been really aggressive in their ability. They are wanting to be the driver of the digital agenda for the enterprise as a whole. They have truly established as innovation hubs, automation hubs for their parent, and are really generating some impressive impact. And these are the examples we are going to cover in much more detail as we deep dive into who are the Pinnacle GICs driving the digital agenda. Back to you, Alan.
Great. Okay. So next, what we talked about at the beginning, and I'm going to ask Michael Jansen to kind of chime in here, is what companies can do to increase their GIC participation to become what we call a Pinnacle GIC. So Michael, could you share a little about that?
Sure. So one of the things we introduced in the early part of the year was the concept of a Pinnacle enterprise. And what we've done is put together a framework that we're using across multiple platforms and evaluation segments to compare outcomes to capability. And we think this is a very unique view of what the marketplace looks like. And so what we've done is, if you look at the attached chart, you'll see the kind of the dot plot of all the participants in the study. And you'll notice that they generally go from the lower left to the upper right. And what we're trying to do here is, if you look on the left axis, you'll see outcomes. We look at cost impact, operational impact, strategic impact. And then on the bottom axis, you'll see the capability maturity, where we're using different elements of actual capability. And we're looking for that cause and effect relationship. So as you go from lower left to the upper right, there is if you do something, you get a result in that. And we're going to be able to show you those results in this analysis going forward here. You will also notice that there are no dots in the upper left, and you'll also notice there are no dots in the bottom right. So that's a good segment, or a good way to tell that you're getting a very good accuracy in the analysis, because if you do something, you get results, and if you don't do something, you don't get the outcomes you're looking for.
Great. Okay. So with that, Parul, let me ask you, talk to us a little bit about how GICs differ from each other.
Sure, Alan. So now, jumping a bit deeper, specifically on the outcome or the impact side of the story, we see Pinnacle GICs have delivered better results across all the three metrics or areas of impact that we assessed, which include the cost impact, which is the hard-hitting quantitative savings that have been achieved. Here, Pinnacle GICs have yielded ROI from digital initiatives, and when we say they have yielded, we mean 100% of the Pinnacle GICs have yielded ROI, whereas as compared to the other GICs, 44% of them are yet to achieve any return on investment on the digital initiatives. Moving to the operational impact side, Pinnacle GICs have been able to achieve more than double improvement in operational KPIs relative to other GICs. And when we say operational KPIs, these include things like staff productivity, process accuracy, etc. Also considering now to the strategic impact, or more like the top line impact here, majority of Pinnacle GICs have been able to achieve significantly high impact in strategic KPIs. Now, strategic KPIs in this parlance include creation of new prototypes, improving customer experience, enhancing go-to-market time. With that, now we'll go deeper into each of these impact areas. Looking at the operational metrics here, digital initiatives across Pinnacle and other GICs have resulted in significant improvement across all operational KPIs. While you see almost a 2 to 2.5x difference across individual KPIs, what really stands out is that there are individual Pinnacle GICs who've been able to deliver more than 100% improvement across KPIs such as process accuracy, reduction in process cycle time. The green charts here indicate the average improvement achieved by Pinnacle GICs, whereas the blue bars indicate the average improvement achieved by other GICs. Giving a few examples here, a GIC of a US multinational company brought the entire core of the backend to GIC, taking care of the bottom line, and has been able to deliver about $5 to $8 million of improvement in just 2 years. Another GIC reduced their FTE team size from 200 to 30, which handles millions of transactions per month, and they were able to do so just by implementing automation in their core backend transactional ops. Moving on and looking at the strategic impact side of the story, Pinnacle GICs have been able to deliver much better impact as compared to the other GICs, not only when it comes to the bottom line impact, but also the top line impact. When we look at strategic KPIs, this includes 4 key elements: prototype creation, reducing the cost of innovation, customer experience enhancement, and decreasing time to market. What interestingly stands out here is not only that they have been able to deliver these impact quantitude in a much higher fashion, but have also been able to do that in a faster manner. Now, GIC of a retailing company leverages pricing analytics to drive competitive advantage. Interestingly, what they have done is they've built a competitive intelligence algorithm-based platform which allows them to track the price changes that have been made by the competitors and automatically pricing their own products, which has helped them derive not only strategic competitive advantage, but also definite pricing impact and revenue impact. With that, I'll hand it over to Michael to see how this maps with the service provider domain.
All right, very good. All right, so, Pearl, when I look at those numbers there, you certainly see an advantage of the Pinnacle, but you also see all the enterprises getting good performance. So you have a really good news and a great news story there. One of the things I wanted to bring was some other additional insight from another study we just completed in August with the service providers. And what we were looking for there was to be able to see what they were seeing as their potential. So what, from a commercial standpoint, where do they see the potential value proposition? Where were they prioritizing their investments? And so we put a couple questions together on one graphic here. And if you give me a second here to explain the chart, what you see on the left-hand side there is what are the benefits that service providers are seeing their clients achieve. So the higher you are on that scale, the better. And then what we've done on the bottom axis there is that we've listed their priorities for investments over the next 6 to 12 months. So what are they looking at investing in for the rest of 2018 and the first half of 2019? And so if we start with the bottom left there, kind of the areas where they're not investing much, blockchain and Internet of Things, not a lot of return, not a lot of investment being intended by the service providers. If you move to the upper right, you see things like automation, you see things like big data, you see cognitive and AI, so different forms of automation. And when you think about this is where they're investing all of their money. They're also seeing high value propositions, and so some good opportunities there from a commercial standpoint. And I would think that the same thing would apply to a GIC. Now, what is actually interesting is to look into the upper left here. Here's an area where value propositions are high, but the investments, smallish or mediocre at best. And so I think what this tells us is these are going to be more niche solutions, and when they can be put to good use, they're highly valuable, but they're seeing lower applicability and lesser penetration than, say, some of the things on the upper right there, the automation. So just wanted to provide this as a good benchmark to compare what the private organizations are doing internally, enterprises are doing internally, versus what commercial organizations are doing. So then I wanted to overlay that same analyses with what the GICs were reporting here. And so what I've done is the priorities, number one priorities, number two, you can see what I've done is take the number one priority for GICs is automation, and you'll see that in the upper right there. You'll see number 2 was cloud solutions. You'll see mobility was number 3, cybersecurity was number 4, and big data analytics was number 5. So a good match there when you think about it, and it kind of proves the point that that commercial and GICs are seeing similar opportunities. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the how side of this equation in the next section, and I'm going to spend more time talking about that automation, because I think that it really is a very key set of initiatives that will be not just for the next 6 to 12 months, but beyond that.
Super. Okay, so why don't we have another poll? As you can see, we like polls here, but this one is now talking a little bit more about, okay, with the challenges of your GIC, what are the biggest barriers to expanding digital in your GIC? And we're asking you to pick 2 of these. Is it difficulty in finding the right talent, budget constraints, inadequate organizational support, inability to anticipate demand, or difficulty in managing existing legacy systems? So there are lot of barriers here, but what are the two that you feel are the biggest barriers for your specific organization? So if everyone could vote on that, we'll keep it open for another few seconds as everyone gets ready. And we'll go 2, 1, and why don't we close the poll? And let's see what we've got. So now it looks like, okay, first of all, the big winner is difficulty in finding the right talent, followed very closely behind by difficulty in managing existing legacy systems. However, there's a good spread on budget constraints, organizational support, inability to anticipate demand. So with all that going on, let me ask Rohit. Rohit, are these the challenges that we're hearing from everyone else in the market?
Yeah, Alan, and surprisingly, this is exactly in alignment with what we hear in the market. I'm just talking a bit more about that. While a lot of these GICs are trying to implement automation, as soon as they try to go beyond the POC stage and really want to scale up some of these initiatives, just using automation as an example, the lack of compatibility among multiple legacy systems creates major issues. At the same time, as soon as they are trying to scale up some of these digital capabilities, finding the right talent, training their existing talent, and all of cultural shift that comes along with that has been proven to be a challenge. Some of them have really gone and taken a crack at it, but this remains the biggest challenge. Interestingly, budget constraints comes here as the third most prominent challenge, whereas we are increasingly seeing that this is not the biggest problem GICs are facing, because the parent is also convinced that these are the initiatives which are critical, and there is a consensus and there's agreement to fund that. However, the challenges are more in terms of their ability to cope with the change that comes along with, or just aligning with businesses on terms of what is required now versus later. So some of the C and D we have seen more prominent versus B. That's the only difference I see.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and when I see that the talent being number one, a difficulty in finding the right talent, think about probably many of the folks on this call are calling in from GICs. But when I think about it from the European and US point of view here, we're continuing to see more and more difficulty in finding talent as labor markets continue to become tighter. And so I think that the talent shortages have become even more chronic, not just from like finding the right talent, but even finding any talents at all, maybe our biggest issue. So as we move into the next section, we're going to talk a little bit more about automation is obviously one of the key factors of that. So I look at that and saying, listen, we can try to invent more people, but that's going to be more challenging. That's going to be a little bit challenging. Usually takes about 20 years. I think we're really going to have to really focus in on the things we can do to make our existing workforces more productive.
Cool. Okay, so why don't we move to the second phase of today's webinar? And it's really how are enterprises executing digital in their GICs? And what we've seen is that there are some GICs that are leading, some are participating. And the real question is, what are you going to be able to do? We believe that digital is the biggest enabler for improvement, but on a number of areas, such as just executing on digital, it's having the right talent, increasing your customer experience, and another a bevy of additional enablers that we see the GICs, their move to digital supporting. So with that said, what I'd like to do is hand it back over to Michael. Talk a little bit, Michael, on automation and what we're seeing.
Yeah, so while we're all thinking about our internal organizations, the outside or the external market is moving very quickly. And so one of the things I get to do is see all of our research and talk about some of the highlights from all of it. And the things that's really fascinating to me right now is the change in the automation suppliers themselves. And so, just a few years, we all started hearing about RPA and the digital workforce, and that's only really been over the last 2 to 3 years. And quite frankly, when I started looking at those firms, they were tiny. I mean, some of them were measured in tens of people or hundreds of people, and we've seen explosive growth in those firms. We've also seen mass. I mean, so like number of employees, I think at UiPath was like 120 last year, and now they have 1,400, and they're looking to hire several thousand people over the next year or two. And so you not only look at the size of those firms and the RPA, but then you also look at the amount of money they're starting to gather. And so we've seen huge influxes of capital into these firms. Now, what does that mean to this group? Well, what that means is what you thought about RPA, maybe loosely thought about it as macros on steroids. You're now going to see a changing in the platform. So as these firms have massive capital, they're looking to redeploy that, and they're looking to actually take advantage of some of the other automation techniques in higher orders. So some of the artificial intelligence, things like OCR and computer vision, machine learning, natural language processing, those are all now starting to be considered or will be likely consideration for acquisition or incorporation into the RPA platforms. And why do I say that? I mean, you would intuitively might say that, hey, AI is much more sophisticated and they'll ultimately be the winner. I would take it more pragmatic approach and say follow the money. Look at where the money's going and look at where the customer penetration, and that quite frankly is going into the leadership or going into the firms that are leading the RPA marketplace, and they have massive customer penetration, their size I just described in terms of employees and capital. And so I do think that the RPA platforms of the future are where you're going to see much more robust capabilities and moving much more into the artificial intelligence and other automation dimensions. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about what you understood about what some of these RPA firms could do. They will be very different firms in the next 12 to 24 months.
That's a bold statement. Okay, so Rohit, can you talk a little bit about what we see as the sequence of projects that the GICs are leveraging to contribute to digital initiatives?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So this is fairly interesting. What we try to see is as we categorize GICs into Pinnacle and then other GICs, we really wanted to get deep down to what are the exact drivers that are leading to this difference. What have these Pinnacle GICs done differently to be able to build better capabilities and drive a higher impact? Two sequences that we want to compare on this page and the next is about, in terms of digital segments, what was the difference in the sequence among Pinnacle and other GICs? And then from the business units that they served, what was the difference? Interestingly, Pinnacle GICs just selected the right priority targets, as Michael was just describing. Automation is where the big money is, that is where the big business impact comes from. Pinnacle GICs adopted or focused on automation early in their journey and then progressed to cover some of the other aspects, cloud, cybersecurity, mobility, etc. Whereas other GICs looked towards low-hanging fruit, something which is a natural extension of their IT capabilities, focusing more on aspects such as mobility. They eventually progressed to cover automation, cybersecurity, etc. But our impression is that the time they took to get there prevented them from really scaling those things up and delivering the impact that some of the Pinnacle GICs have delivered. Now, we understand this is a point-in-time assessment, so eventually other GICs are also expected to catch up and increase the amount of impact they're delivering. But as of today, prioritizing some of those other areas have really helped GICs deliver more. On the next page, if we look at what are the business functions that these GICs focused on, which helped them achieve results earlier, you'll not see a lot of differences. The primary difference is around the middle of the chart, where we see Pinnacle GICs experimented or piloted more projects, more of these digital projects on functions such as finance and accounting, whereas some of the other GICs were more inclined to do this with their industry-specific or business functions. What this meant in our understanding is that F&A was a relatively easier team to work with, more developed capabilities in the GIC, more control, helped Pinnacle GICs do early POC, learn from their experience, improve the process, and then take it to broader industry-specific processes where the business context was also much more important in implementation, and they had to work with a broader variety, broader set of stakeholders to actually implement and scale up. So that was one of the differences we saw that probably helped them achieve results earlier and also better results.
Great. Okay, so now the question is, there's always been the discussion about corporate and GIC. How do the teams work together? Parul, could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Alan. So Pinnacle organizations have moved the needle on several dimensions of the operating model. Almost 3/4 of them have reoriented their existing model for digital services to make them more functional and more cooperative to enable digital here. They've not only embedded their digital teams within the existing business units, but they also coordinate in a seamless fashion with the corporate digital teams through a centralized approach. Now, this approach has helped in maintaining almost utmost clarity and alignment on the end objectives and has also facilitated acceleration of the go-to-market cycle. Better performing GICs have not only been able to realize that cohesiveness between their and corporate digital teams is imperative, but have also recognized that driving cross-functional collaboration through a formal and a structured approach is paramount to achieve truly breakthrough results, which is explained further on the next page. Now, most Pinnacle GICs have adopted a project-based cross-functional collaboration approach and have plans to implement structural changes by collapsing functions. They're breaking silos, providing employees with wider exposure to help improve knowledge flow, increase productivity, and stimulate innovation. Few of the leading GICs have also created centers of excellence for selected digital capabilities that have helped them significantly enhance their pace of adoption, sharing of skills, and best practices. Now, looking at the yardsticks that are leveraged by organizations to gauge the success of digital initiatives, if you could move on to the next page. Yeah. Most Pinnacle GICs, most of them have either implemented or are planning to implement clearly defined output or outcome-linked metrics, roles and responsibilities to track the return on their digital initiatives. On the comparison, most of the other GICs, more than a third of them, do not use any metrics to track the returns. And when we say they do not use any metrics, this is cumulative of they're not either using the output outcome metrics or even the traditional IT metrics such as on time, on budget, etc. Moving on. Now we've looked at the technology side of the story, the organizational structural side of the digital execution. However, what remains at the nucleus of this entire digital agenda is talent. Pinnacle GICs are winning the war for talent across multiple dimensions. By adopting the right mix of talent retention initiatives, Pinnacle GICs have not only been able to check attrition, but have also progressed much further on the talent management curve. Initiatives proven to be most successful include institutionalizing practices which are just beyond offering higher compensation and introducing differentiated work environment. These key initiatives which have proven to be the most successful are such as creating a more sustainable and stimulating work environment to the digital workforce, accelerating their learning curve, keeping them productively engaged, promoting practices that enable employee empowerment, such as global mobility programs, focused reskilling and upskilling programs. Now, having discussed all the key ingredients, let's move on to let's look at the big bucks or the quantum of investments that have been made by organizations in this digital enablement. While leading GICs, almost 91% of the Pinnacle GICs spend more than 10% of their GIC budget on digital initiatives, the fence sitters, the other GICs, need more proof points, and more than half of them have currently spent less than 10% of their budget on digital initiatives. Now, these investments have a direct and a profound impact on the returns yielded so far. Pinnacle GICs have been able to achieve almost 2x, almost double ROI as compared to the other GICs. And if you even look at the quantum of GICs that have been able to achieve this ROI so far, all Pinnacle GICs have been able to achieve that, while majority of the others, 44% of them, are yet to achieve any ROI. Now, building on the investment theme, Alan, over to you for the next question.
Great. Thank you, Pearl. So our next question, and I want everyone to pay attention to how we're asking it. It's, Which digital capability is likely to witness the maximum budget increase in 2019? Now be careful here. What we're asking is the budget increase, not which will have the highest budget, but which area do you feel is going to have the highest budget increase going forward? Is it automation, analytics, cloud, cybersecurity, or mobility? So once again, what we're trying to understand here is which area is going to get the biggest infusion of budget going forward. So why don't we leave it open for another couple of seconds as everyone votes? And 3, 2, 1. Why don't we close that up? And let's see. Well, we clearly have a winner. That automation is the big winner. Everything else other than mobility was about even. So let me ask the entire panel, does that jive with what you're seeing? Rohit?
Yeah, I didn't think anybody will be surprised, as Michael was also commenting earlier. Automation is definitely an area where we are seeing a lot of money going in. Interestingly, cybersecurity is ahead of cloud and analytics. I believe a bit of this has also got to do with the fact that GICs have already invested in analytics, a lot of them also in cloud. So the incremental investments in those areas could be limited. But also in cybersecurity right now, it's still early stages in their adoption. I believe as we move 2-3 years down the line, we'll see a massive increase in investments in cybersecurity as well. Especially everything is digital, everything is connected now. So cybersecurity is kind of the holy grail going forward, I think, after automation. So yeah.
I think I was actually surprised by the cybersecurity there actually being such the number two number on the page.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael. Honestly, I believe, in our experience, since analytics is a segment which has already matured, we believe less incremental investment going in that particular domain. However, the ROI which is coming out of the already existing investments made in analytics continues to be higher. So this is just incremental. So maybe that's the case. Cybersecurity is a bit higher as compared to analytics or cloud.
And I think when I've already looked ahead of the slides, I know where they're going. You're going to see a differentiation between the Pinnacle and non-Pinnacle on that cybersecurity issue. So I want to we'll show that in the next slide here.
Yeah.
Great. So Rohit, why don't you talk a little bit about the investment into automation, what we see that playing out as?
Yeah, so I think the previous question really builds up a good platform, as we are seeing cybersecurity, automation are really two different areas where we see a major difference in what has been achieved in non-Pinnacle GICs and Pinnacle GICs. At a broader level, interestingly, both in terms of how much penetration GICs have achieved, which is depicted on the x-axis, where we are looking at of the total global scale for different capabilities, how much currently resides within a GBS or within the GIC shared services organizations. And on the y-axis, if we look at the satisfaction that has been achieved from these digital initiatives, 5 being the most highest satisfaction and 1 being the least. Interestingly, the clusters are completely separate from one another. Pinnacle GICs on all areas are doing more and better, more or less, as compared to non-Pinnacle GICs. But as Michael was also commenting, cybersecurity, if you see in terms of satisfaction, is right on top, even among the Pinnacle GICs. Automation is what has the highest penetration. On an average, these GICs have 30 to 35% penetration, everything on the higher side of 30, whereas non-Pinnacle GICs are on the lower side, and their relative penetration in areas such as cybersecurity and analytics is on the lower side. So clearly we see a big distinction in where they have invested and what they have achieved as a result of that. In terms of incremental investments, the large chunk of these non-Pinnacle GICs, and also as this group has indicated here, we believe automation, cybersecurity are going to be some of the large areas, and also analytics continues to be one of the more important areas for them to focus on.
Yeah, so Rohit, I think that's pretty indicative of what we just heard from the poll question we just did here. maybe we'll see a movement in cybersecurity among all GICs and GBSs.
Yeah, agree with that, Michael. So Michael, over to you to cover some of the key messages we are taking away from this webinar and what are the implications we want to highlight.
Yeah, so back to the talent shortage, I do think that's going to be one of the most chronic and hard to solve problems of our generation going forward here for businesses. And so anything we can do with the automation is going to be an extremely important part of that equation. And it's going to become more chronic and it's going to become more challenging. And I think we did a large amount of kind of labor arbitrage moves to low cost locations. And I think that will continue to stabilize. I don't know that it'll necessarily continue to grow, but it will stabilize, some pluses and minuses there. But the need for that ability to make the existing workforce in the primary Euro and US markets is going to be, or North American markets, is going to be absolutely critical. And to the extent that the GICs and GBSs can take that as a charter in their overall organizational strategies, I think that is absolutely a critical part of it. You can look, you can take it on as, hey, we'll do what we're told, or we can look at it and say, hey, we understand you got some real big challenges in North America and Europe. We're here to help. And then finally, obviously, we talked about automation and the digital accelerant for the enterprise as a whole. It's not something it's a project. It's going to be more of a philosophy, more of a, how do we help the organization become more digital and improve the overall customer experiences and the employee experiences?
So with that said, first of all, thanks to all of our panelists for today. We're going to switch over shortly to a Q&A section. Hopefully everyone took from today some ideas and some thoughts on moving ahead with their GICs to help become a great enabler for your organization. As we got into the Q&A session, a couple of things. As I mentioned, feel free to type your questions into the panel. We will try to get to as many as possible, and we will get to you. If by any chance we don't answer all the questions, you could see below on the screen here are our emails. You can also click on our website, Contact Us, and we will answer any questions. And then once again, just to remind everyone that just by registering, you will receive a copy of all of today's slides. If we go ahead just for a second before we go to the Q&A, the other thing, a couple of notes, is feel free to check out our blogs on our website for the latest perspectives on global services. You can see written by everyone on today's panel, along with others. In addition, on our website too, we have related content, and we have a whole list of research that we have written that talk about this, that will be a little more thought-provoking for everyone to really dive deep into this. So with this, I'm going to kick off the Q&A, and my first question will be that comes in is, and I believe this would be for Michael. Michael, what do you see are the key challenges faced by enterprises while leveraging how they typically circumvent these challenges?
Well, so a lot of it goes back to culture. When I'm talking to very senior executives, so those that sit at the very top of the organization, it comes back to their first thing is going to go always to culture and how are they enabling the organization. The second thing will be talent. And up until recently, it was more focused on getting the right talent on board. And so if you can find the right talent, I think maybe more recently it's can I get talent, period. But those are the things that are usually comes down to the macro view of how to overcome this. I think at a more pragmatic view, or more, how do I implement that if I'm a GIC, because I can't set the culture for the entire enterprise. It really comes down to, can I help improve the process more on an end-to-end basis than exactly whatever's been handed to me to date. So the more you can think about enabling an end-to-end process design, thinking about the entire customer experience, thinking about the entire employee experiences, those are the two things that I think are going to be the most obvious things to overcome the obstacles. And at the end of the day, it's also just being entrepreneurial.
Gotcha. Okay. The next question comes in, and this is for Rohit. Rohit, why should an organization leverage its shared services center rather than its existing centralized digital teams?
No, that's interesting one, Alan. And before I answer, just to clarify, leveraging GBS or shared services organization does not imply that they are substituting the role of centralized digital teams. In fact, they really need to work, in coordination, in collaboration with the centralized digital teams, centralized innovation teams to really meet the organizational objective. Why do organizations really need to work, or why can they benefit from working with the GIC organizations? As I believe, because across multiple organization-wide initiatives, there are variety of objectives and variety of intents and a multitude of different approaches that they take across businesses and regions. However, the easiest platform where it all comes together, or where most of them come together, is the global shared services, is the GIC, because they have teams across different operations, horizontal, back office, and IT. And then they are serving different regions. They have lots of deep capabilities in these areas, and they have been working with business stakeholders, so they understand the business context as well. All that put together allows them a platform to really collate the different objectives, the different approaches from different regions, and understand and deliver what the enterprise needs. Also, they are a very strong platform that allows application of best practices from one team to the other, learnings, quickly test and improve, at the same time innovate at a lower cost. So all these reasons combined make them a great choice to run many digital initiatives. But just to clarify, they need to do this in parallel or in a collaboration with the centralized digital or centralized innovation teams.
So Alan, I see another question on there around the chief digital officer, and I thought maybe I'd just amplify on that if it's okay.
Go for it.
So the chief digital officer is actually an interesting role in the organization. Not every organization has one. I think it's still largely undefined, or it's not a common definition across all firms, if you will, where they have them. I was with a very large insurance company a couple of weeks ago in New York City, and the conversation was, we sat down with their automation team out of their chief digital officer, and I was asking from just brief demographics, and they said roughly we have 2,500 people in the CDO's organization, and I have 5,000 people in the CIO's organization. And so you really, a good chunk of folks were sitting in that CDO team. And, my takeaway from that was the CIO is going to be focused on the plumbing, building out the infrastructure, really making sure that, everything was working on time and focusing on apps development. Whereas the CDO team was really going to be working on the business context of the conversations. And I think that's really where the GICs should really focus in on. First of all, learn, does your organization have a CDO, and understand how you can work with them in a very pragmatic perspective, and saying, listen, we can help implement those digital solutions on a scaled basis, because we do see all aspects of the organization. Now, we don't just see HR, we don't just see finance, we don't just see maybe a call center. We see everything, especially for the larger GICs and GBSs. So I think, understanding the role of the organizational perspective of the CDO is absolutely critical.
Gotcha. So let me ask sort of a follow-on question that was asked here, is that with all this investment going on and focus, what are some of the processes that we expect to be eliminated from the GIC service portfolio due to digital disruption?
So let me take a shot at it, and Michael, you can add more. Is that, and this is interesting because this is very common question, not just for GICs, but for a lot of service providers also, is that we are seeing a lot of processes which are very much repetitive, which are very much predictable, getting automated to a large extent in the next 2 to 3 years. Do we believe that there are going to be large-scale automation implemented overnight and in very much immediate term? No, we are seeing a reasonable pace at which these are progressing. At the same time, more particularly in a lot of GBS organizations or GIC organizations, we are seeing that while a lot of processes will get eliminated, the job itself or the role itself of the GIC employees may not completely get eliminated. So a portion of the work will get eliminated or automated, which in turn will be filled with those employees moving up the value chain, focusing on more high value tasks in the similar areas, more global ownership that these GICs will assume in the overall process value chain.
Great. Okay, now I've got talking about talent, which is obviously a big question. This is a specific question of what are the right technical and functional skills that an individual should focus on in order to grow in the GIC space? Who wants to take that one?
So I can take a shot at that. So to answer, very specifically, what are the technical or functional skills? I think slightly difficult, but let me just take an example and contextualize. With regard to technical skills, what we are seeing is that almost everyone will require some kind of technology understanding and technology skills, ability to work with the robots, and that does not only mean ability to work on computers or use RPA solutions, but also the ability to understand how they work and what kind of tweaks may be possible, not possible. Basic understanding of that will be important for a large variety of workforce. That's the most important technology skill, I believe, or adaptation that is required. That's primarily a technology skill, primarily a cultural mindset change also. Secondly, from a functional side, I believe that almost all the functional or domain skills are going to remain very important. In fact, they will become much more important where the employees will need a deeper understanding of the function or domain. So if somebody is working for a BFSI a company, for a banking GIC, their understanding of that particular, let's say, retail industry banking operations, the requirement will be much higher. They'll need to have a much deeper understanding, because the task that the human element of the future workforce, which will be a human plus tech workforce, the components residing, the responsibilities for the human workforce, which will be very much driven by their judgment, that they need to apply across these processes, the decisions they need to make, and their understanding of the domain will be very critical. Just extending the question a bit, some of the things which we believe are going to become much more important, which have been considered critical for a small set of workforce, will now start applying to larger workforce for these GICs, are the cognitive skills. These are the thinking skills, critical thinking, design thinking. These are skills, the ability to identify patterns, basic analytical skills. Because what we are seeing is that, for example, in a fraud monitoring team, with the scale at which digital is getting implemented, the scale at which the entire user interface is changing, there's a constant need for a broader workforce to be on their watch out, identify patterns, continuously in a very agile manner evolve what they are doing. Similarly, in a lot of other areas, the role of humans will evolve across these processes. So some of these skills, the ability to work with project teams, because we believe there's going to be more cross-functional collaboration happening in the GICs, the ability to be able to communicate and comprehend better as they work more closely with the onshore stakeholders or business stakeholders. So some of those soft skills and cognitive skills will also become much more important in addition to techno-functional skills going forward.
Cool. Excellent. Okay, Parul, I've got a question for you. We're talking all about this automation and really investment. How are GICs driving top line growth or revenue impact?
So Alan, a very interesting and a pertinent question here. Of all the technology segments here, I believe analytics and automation are the two key segments which have helped GICs deliver remarkable top line or revenue impact. To give an example, for instance, GIC of a global retailer, they created a demand forecasting engine that supported decisions that were taken across the BUs and also provided accurate forecasts on inventory at hand, product mix, etc. Now, it not only used the data signals, but also generated forecasts through APIs, etc. All in all combined, it analyzed the customer profile in terms of demographics, locations, and helped them not only target the right customer segment, enhancing the right penetration numbers, but also accelerated their go-to-market time, which helped in millions of savings in the back end. So impacting the top line and the bottom line with this kind of an initiative. Also, what we've seen, based on our interactions with the GIC leaders, that a GIC might be contributing to revenue impact in some or the other form, but it has been difficult for them to quantify it or attribute the benefit to the GIC. For these cases, we've helped GICs, through our proprietary framework where we'll help them quantify the impact that has been delivered, the impact beyond arbitrage to their corporate or parent teams.
Great. Okay. Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Michael, among the other GICs, are you seeing that, are there those that have tried implementing automation but have become disheartened by the expectations on cost reductions, timing, ROI, and such? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, so let me answer that question broadly. Yes, we are seeing some of that. Part of it is a challenge that we have set, maybe the RPA vendors have set unrealistic expectations. They said, hey, just sign up for it, download it, and you too can have a robot running at your sides, solving world hunger. And we're going to make all your things better by just, downloading it, and anybody can do it. The reality is there are many more complexities than they would allude to. So there are security hurdles to get through. There are bot operations, there's bot maintenance to get through. And they're also not quite as easy to program or to get up and running as they would allude to, except in some of the very simplest examples. So I would say is that the potential and the use cases are absolutely there, but it's going to take a little bit more comprehensive view of the process, maybe a little bit more pragmatic view of where you should aim your attempts at doing it. But I do not see this as something that's going to be a quick trend or a hot trend and it's going to go away in a couple of years. I think this is absolutely going to be the way of the future, and especially as I alluded to earlier in the presentation about bringing in some of the AI dimensions to this as well. So I think that's absolutely going to drive the impact of automation to helping solve some really critical enterprise issues.
So to summarize, the answer is hang in there.
Hang in there, yes. Don't give up, and don't give up for sure, because it's not just a temporary thing.
Excellent. Well, don't give up. How's that for a way to end our webinar today? Want to thank everyone for joining us today. Once again, if you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. You will receive the slides in the next few days, and look forward to seeing you all on our next webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you for joining us.